Hey guys, John Adamson with Seeking Light. So we continue with session 5 of the Applied Ethics Medical Mandates course. We have video tonight, so I don't know what's up with my camera. And also, I am in my car, as you can tell, and so there will be some background noise, unlike my recording from home. Anyway, thank you for watching this. I noticed that the viewership of this is dwindling. I know it's not for everybody, but those of you who are watching, I ask of you to watch this with a critical mindset. Ask yourself, is what I'm saying sound accurate? Does it seem researched? Is there improvements in the way it can be presented? Because I'm using the feedback that I'm getting on these little snippets to help finalize what will end up being an overall 2-hour course at some point. I might have to pare down some of my information. That's okay. Course development is challenging. It's putting together a lot of thoughts and ideas and hopefully a cohesive unit. And even though I've done this quite a bit with several courses to date, it never gets easier. So anyway, your thoughts and feedback are most welcome. Now let's look at where we've been so far in this course. We started off by establishing the fact that all people have a worldview, a lens through which they view the world, and that would include ethics and law. There is no such thing as personal truth. We don't own truth. Truth is outside of us, and generally it is discoverable in terms of moral terms because we all have overlaps for the most part in our worldviews. And so we have mutually agreed upon standards upon which we can say things are right or wrong, good or evil. People have used throughout history and in multiple different settings the golden rule as a basis for justification of things like the vaccine mandates. But really, if you only use the golden rule, which has its origins in the principle of beneficence, you're not covering enough in terms of what should be the moral ethical principles behind this debate about whether medical mandates should occur. So we looked at last time the difference between beneficence and non-maleficence. In other words, doing good and avoiding doing harm would be an easy way to synopsize those. And the balance between the two is challenging sometimes because we want to make sure that we are erring on the side of beneficence while mitigating or minimizing non-maleficence, or maleficence, I should say. And one of the things that we look at in terms of what is maleficent, meaning causing harm, is what are different kinds of harms. And so we talked about in our last session multiple types of harm, like, for example, physical, psychological, economic harm. There's different types of harm which we must keep in mind as we're talking about this particular topic. Now, one thing we're called to have towards our fellow human beings that all ethical systems realize is the term fidelity. You might recognize that, especially if you're a Marine or you know some Latin, fidelis, faithfulness. So having good faith towards somebody would generally, again, be a desire for doing that which is good for the sake of that individual and supporting them. And if we're being faithful to somebody, we are showing loyalty towards them in supporting their best interests. Now, a big question arises under the topic of fidelity. The question is, are leaders, I mean, those that we have elected into office over us, are they issuing mandates that are supporting the highest level of faithfulness, integrity, pursuit of the duty that they have to those impacted by the mandates? We've already covered some of the harms that vaccine mandates or similar principles of mandates have imposed upon society, and they have not generally, when you're looking at pure numbers of people impacted, these mandates have definitely demonstrated more harm than good. Now, one of the things, another principle that we need to cover is justice. And when you think of justice, you think of fairness. And this is such a big topic these days. You hear terms like equality and equity thrown around. And the idea of equality is generally that we all have the equal ability to do something. So all people, regardless of their race, creed, gender, etc., should be able to have an opportunity if they test high enough and they work hard enough to get into medical school. That would be equality. Equity basically says that we have equal distribution of all things to all people, regardless of the merit of that individual in deserving that. So there's this debate going on related to equity and equality. But for the purpose of this particular course, we're going to talk about justice and fairness. And so these are definitions. Justice is the moral obligation to act on the basis of fair adjudication between competing claims. So for example, in justice, in terms of legal precedent, we see the symbol of justice is a woman holding a scale with a blindfold around her eyes, Lady Justice, meaning that she does not look upon the individuals in weighing the merit of their case. So she doesn't judge by whether one person is rich or poor, good looking or ugly, anything like that. Fairness. Fairness assumes that people should be treated equally regardless of their station in life. That is, they should not be subject to discrimination. Now, how might this apply in this particular situation with the whole mandates? You remember one of the mandates was issued by multiple jurisdictions in the United States to shut down businesses related to COVID. And so what we had were businesses, especially small businesses, going out of business, and people being unable to make their livelihoods. They lost their businesses. A lot of businesses folded, and then they ended up getting stuck on welfare. Now, was that a fair treatment of them closing their businesses? Well, you could say, well, it was equally applied to that whole jurisdiction where you couldn't go to certain stores and you couldn't interact with people in an individual basis. But do you know one group that generally did not struggle during that time was the super rich? And so one of the individuals that got a lot of flack during the pandemic was Nancy Pelosi. She did an interview from her mansion in front of her $20,000 freezer in her home, eating $15 per pint ice cream. She was doing an interview where that was all occurring and evident in the frame, and people were saying, well, that's not fair, that's not justice. She's urging people to close down and put their livelihoods on hold, where she's perfectly fine. She's still drawing a paycheck on the dime of the taxpayer, and of course she's made millions from investments during the time that she's been in office. So here's an example of applied justice fairness. So this is from James chapter 2, and James is writing, suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. What kind of meeting is he talking about? He's just talking about a gathering in a church. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, here's a good seat for you, but say to the poor man, you stand there or sit on the floor by my feet, have you not discriminated amongst yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? And so James, in the context of equalness within the church body, argues that people shouldn't be unfairly treated based on their socioeconomic backgrounds. So how might we change this statement somewhat to fit the modern context? So this is the gospel according to John Adamson. No, it's not really gospel, but you'll get my meaning. Suppose a man or woman without political office or a degree in a medical field says, I don't want the blank. And a person with political power or a degree in a medical field says, you must take the blank, and forces you to take the blank. Have they not exercised unauthorized authority over the other person? In other words, is this justice? Is this fairness? That a certain individual, a group of individuals, has the right to tell somebody, you shall or shall not do something related to your body. Is that justice or fairness? There's another ethical principle called veracity. Veracity comes from the Latin verb or word veritas, which means truth. And so veracity in an ethical sense means truth or accuracy. In other words, we have a responsibility to be truthful. And let's say telling a patient what their diagnosis is, what that means, what options they have for treatment, that type of thing. And that is something we need to question when you have authorities saying that you must do such and such based upon blank. And we must examine that truth claim. So we need to examine who's telling the truth. So for example, Dr. Anthony Fauci, obviously he's given the most airtime. What does he say? Well, he said a lot of different things over time. So for example, in the spring of 2020, he was saying, don't wear masks. And then he morphed into wear masks, wear more than one mask, etc. So he's changed over time, and he always based his statements on what he said was the science. He originally said that he believed that herd immunity would occur with vaccination related to getting 60 to 70% of the population vaccinated. Then he's been incrementally raising that, and now he's saying 90+% is needed. He used to say 2 shots would be sufficient. And then he said you needed at least a single booster. And then he started saying you need repeated boosters. Now you look at other people that have said other things during this time. Dr. Luc Montagnier, he is a Nobel laureate for one of the co-discoverers of HIV. And one of the things he's talked about is concerned that there could be widespread what's called antibody-dependent enhancement of the viruses, or any permutation of COVID-19. So is he telling the truth? Or what about Dr. Robert Malone, one of the inventors of the mRNA technology used in the very vaccines for Pfizer and Moderna? He's had a lot of concerns, and he's talked about this publicly, over the safety of the vaccines, that they might increase the number of resistant mutations rather than letting natural immunity occur for the most part. And this is one of the guys that helped develop it. Is he telling the truth? Here's an article from CNN just from this year. The title was Right-Wing Media Pushed a Deworming Drug to Treat COVID-19 that the FDA says is unsafe for humans. Okay, so by couching it this way, are they telling the truth? When they're talking about ivermectin. Ivermectin's been around since the 1970s, and it's been used to treat human beings first, safely and effectively for over billions of doses across the world. It's single-handedly helped eliminate a type of blindness that occurred from parasitic infection in certain areas of, I believe it was, I can't remember the exact part of the world, but anyway, it's a safe and effective drug for human beings. It's on the list of 100 essential medications by the World Health Organization. And many years ago, and well before this pandemic, it was discovered that it has excellent antiviral capabilities. And in fact, a number of large studies have pointed to its efficacy in helping prevent and treat COVID-19. So who's telling the truth? And then what about this one here? Current available data do not show ivermectin is effective against COVID-19. That's from the FDA. However, concurrent with this statement have been a number of excellent studies that have shown Not only is it effective, it's also safe. And so here's a study that actually you can find on NIH. What's NIH? Happens to be our own country's website, nih.gov. 2-dose ivermectin prophylaxis at a dose of 300 micrograms per kilogram of body weight with a gap of 72 hours was associated with a 73% reduction of SARS-CoV-2 infection amongst healthcare workers for the following month. This is a huge study, and there's been others just like it. Who's telling the truth? Who's honoring the principle of veracity here? Continuing our examination of who's telling the truth. You know, one of the things that has often been said is that we should follow the money. Follow the money. And it was largely believed, even by one side of the political aisle that's pushing the vaccines right now, that big pharma was a problem. In fact, one pharmaceutical company that has been sued over issues related to integrity, veracity, has been Pfizer. They've paid out multiple billions of dollars in lawsuits. But what have we seen that has happened for Pfizer as a result of this pandemic? Back in 12/11/2020, when the vaccine was first available to the public, they had an initial spike in their value, and then they dipped. But you'll notice the general trend has been hugely significant for them. Their stock value has gone up tremendously well in this last year. Oh, and what happened about October? Well, October of this year, well, we started to see what? Boosters. And that's helped drive their stock even further. And even now, what are we getting? We're getting a new pill that you can take from Pfizer, an antiviral, which, by the way, has been tested against ivermectin, which is pennies on the dollar, versus the Pfizer medication, which is, well, let's just say it's not pennies on the dollar. Who's telling the truth? Should we continue to follow the truth? Look at the price of Moderna. Back in January of 2021, when their vaccine was just rolling out, they were valued somewhere in the lower $100 range generally. They did hit a high of 185, but look where they're trending now. Now, what's happening with them may be related to something that their CEO recently said. But anyway, follow the money when it comes to promotion of what is said to be true and what is said to be false. Now, the reference on this was partly cut off, but you can find this in Reuters. This is a quote from Reuters. The head of drug maker Moderna said COVID-19 vaccines are unlikely to be as effective against Omicron variant of the coronavirus as they have been previously, sparking fresh worry in financial markets about the trajectory of the pandemic. So he makes this statement recently in the end of November. I know you can't quite see that, but it was the very end of November of this year. And what happened? Well, Moderna's stock dropped a little bit. So anyway, who's telling the truth? Well, that's a very truthful statement. And yet we're getting from some parties, you should continue to take the vaccine. And then this is his specific quote. There is no world, I think, where the effectiveness is the same level we had with Delta. And that's what he is saying concerning the Moderna vaccine against the new Omicron variant. Now, who's telling the truth? You know, Moderna's head CEO says, you know, our current vaccine isn't effective really against Omicron. But here's a different quote. Omicron can evade the protection initial vaccines give, but boosters increase efficacy and better protect against the newest variant of concern, Dr. Anthony Fauci said Sunday. So who's telling the truth, the head of Moderna or Anthony Fauci? because they have competing arguments. And then here we go again. It would take 3 months for Moderna to produce a vaccine specifically targeting Omicron. Dr. Paul Burton, the company's chief medical officer, said during an investors conference on Wednesday. Pfizer said last week, this is just recently, that it could produce an Omicron-tailored vaccine in approximately 100 days, subject to regulatory approval. So this is going to be a new vaccine, folks, without FDA clearance. So who's telling the truth? Hospitals get paid more for COVID admissions. More COVID patients, more dollars per admit. This was part of the provisions related to emergency care for COVID. Also, if it's confirmed that you had a loved one die of COVID, they get a bump, a bonus of $9,000 towards funeral expenses. Who's telling the truth? And this is anecdotal, but I have heard of situations where families were begging doctors to put on the family member's death certificate, cause of death, COVID, so they could get help with funeral costs. Who's telling the truth? So here we are at the conclusion. And we've covered several ethical principles. We still have a little bit to go, but all of these principles, I am going to be melding them together for final discussion at some point. Also, we're going to be looking at the arguments that are used, especially from the beneficence standpoint and the golden rule standpoint, that would force people through mandates to get medical interventions or close their business. The same arguments that a certain aspect of our political spectrum and our healthcare worlds, like Dr. Anthony Fauci is using, should be used against those who are obese or those who smoke. The very same principles, and why they're inconsistent in their application is beyond me. And so anyway, we're going to be looking at all that. I covet your comments. Your comments will make this a better course. And I want that partly because, well, I like to have good courses, but also because I want this to be a solid argument that anybody can present to those that would argue that medical mandates are a good thing. Also, please consider supporting me at Venmo at John-Adamson-29. This is John Adamson with Seeking Light. Take care. God bless.